Welcome, everybody. I'm Matt Miller. I'm joined by Jeff Markiafava.
Hey.
And we are taking a look at Pathfinder Kingmaker, the first computer role-playing game, isometric style CRPG in the Pathfinder universe. A well-known tabletop role-playing game that a lot of people are very enthusiastic about for very good reason. It's an excellent RPG that's based on the old Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 edition game system. Pathfinder kind of evolved to be its own thing, and this computer role-playing game is based on one of the best adventure paths that they did in that series, or rather in that game. Kingmaker tracks the story of you and your adventuring party going into a sort of lawless frontier filled with monsters and dungeons and things like that, and eventually becoming a baron of that area and sort of having to make decisions about how the land develops and how you're going to treat the people who live there and all that kind of stuff. And so the game here is kind of interesting and different from a lot of the isometric RPGs that are out there because of that.
And we should say that Leo's here too.
Oh yeah, hey Leo.
Oh hey, I didn't see you guys over there.
Well, there you are in the booth.
Yeah.
How dare I forget?
He doesn't count.
Thank you.
So yeah, this game is, if you're a fan of stuff like Baldur's Gate back in the day, this is a very clear homage to that style of old game. And I'll even show you just how, if you're familiar with basic D&D systems, a lot of that stuff is going to feel familiar. You've got your 6 stats: strength, dex, con, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. You've got saving throws. You've got armor class. You've got attack bonuses. You've got skills like athletics and persuasion and perception. All this stuff should feel very familiar to people who know D&D. And even if you don't know D&D all that well, a lot of this stuff, just by osmosis over the years of being a game player, you kind of are familiar with at least some of this stuff. Yeah. Mm-hmm. One of the things that Pathfinder Kingmaker does, which, by the way, is from developer Owlcat Games and published by Deep Silver, one of the things that this game does a little bit differently from a lot of the games in this style that have released recently is that it's very, very true to the old rule set, or to the established rule set anyway. It doesn't make a lot of allowances for the idea of this is a computer game, and so we're going to do things a little bit differently, or we're going to speed things up. That's also one of the reasons that I think some people are really going to actively dislike this game compared to some of the other very innovative projects that have come out in recent years in the isometric RPG space. Stuff like Divinity or
Divinity 2.
Divinity 2, or the Numenera game, Torment, that came out. These are all titles that really innovated within the space. And in a lot of ways, this is a game that doesn't do a lot of crazy stuff. You're doing dungeon exploration. You're doing, fighting monsters down in the depths. You're wandering along on a map and deciding where to go next.
So what's cool about it?
What is cool about it is that you've got this government system. It takes a while to unlock. You have to play a good ways into the game before you get to it. But once you do, you have all sorts of options for how you run your kingdom. Are you going to be a good ruler? Are you going to be kind of evil and selfish? Are you going to ransack the temple, or are you going to rebuild it to be a site of worship in the future? And in the midst of all that, you're still going to be going out on dungeon adventures. And when things get dicey in your barony, you're going to have to go and deal with stuff. So the section we're looking at right now is just to give you a little bit of a glimpse of just how sort of standard and familiar a lot of the core systems are. I've got everything tuned down difficulty-wise to easy, so we can just kind of breeze through these encounters during the video. But as you might expect, you can do pause and play combat everywhere you go. There's lots of skills that you can use during battle, depending on your character, and you can control each character individually, and they each have different spells and capabilities. And when you turn it up to a higher difficulty, those are going to be pretty challenging. But all of this stuff is going to be very, very familiar to anybody who is a CRPG fan. But let's hop over real quick and take a look at the government systems.
All right, Miller, so what are we taking a look at here?
Okay, so we're loading in to take a look at the actual government table. We've fast-forwarded a little bit past that early dungeon that I was just showing off so that we can take a look at the very beginning of the barony. So from here, and this is, like I said, I think the thing that makes this game different from a lot of isometric RPGs that are out there is that you have all of these choices of how you run things. You can choose, like an advisor. Who do we want for a regent? I'll set one of my party members here, Valerie, for that. And the people that you put into different roles are going to actually change how things are run and the events that follow. You also get to do stuff like claim new sections for your barony. So I can select Valerie here. I don't have a lot of options because this is right at the beginning. But then days pass and we try to claim this area, and that continues as the story progresses to other areas that you can try to claim.
Okay.
You've got things like being able to go and look at your individual town and build individual buildings that will change how that is set up. So let's build. We'll put in a brewery.
Good call.
First and foremost.
Good.
Heart of the economy.
The longhouse. All this stuff. Oh, should we have an orphanage?
Sure.
Okay. So all these things then are kind of going in, and I'm getting to shape the way that my town shakes out over time. And like I said, in between these things, you're going to go out and go on adventures and get to explore this big, wide, open map. The map is actually what you're kind of seeing here in brief. But in between that, you're even having these things like, well, we talked about the temple. So I could go pillage the temple, or I can rebuild the temple.
Okay.
And depending on what I do, it will change how things progress in my kingdom. But in between that, and we'll hop ahead one more time to kind of show this off, there's opportunities to wander around outside in the countryside and discover new things.
All right, so we're back at the main map now?
Exactly. So from here, you're taking your party out, and like I said, this is the most classic of classic role-playing game kinds of tropes. You even have, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point we run into a random encounter, which is a thing that a lot of games have kind of moved away from.
Right.
But that's part of this kind of classic old school D&D style adventure thing, is that you would go out into the wilderness and you'd have to find places to rest, and you could get ambushed while you were resting, or even while you were walking along, there was a chance that, while you're moving through here, you could get into a fight. And it is not really like a story-related fight. It's just a thing that you kind of get involved in. And I'll be honest, for me, that is a thing that it doesn't totally work for me a lot of the time. Random encounters as a conceit is something that I just don't know if there's still a place for that in a world where there's so much crafted content in a lot of RPGs.
Right.
Now, that said, I know that there are other people who feel differently than me about that. There are people who do love that kind of classic style where everything is sort of random and there's an element of sort of procedural generation to the situations that you encounter and the things that you do. That you'll see even below here, you're even managing things like encumbrance, which is a concept that for most people who run D&D games, like actual D&D tabletop games, they've abandoned because it's something that it's just like, I don't want to have to deal with encumbrance of stuff. But this is a game that cares about that sort of thing. And if your encumbrance gets above a certain load, then your travel speed gets reduced. And the amount of time you can be doing stuff before you get fatigued, that also goes down. And so you're managing a level of specificity here that will be a a turn off for many players.
Right.
But for some people, I think maybe really interesting because it's so much of a throwback to the way that computer role-playing games used to be. Even to the point of like, when you're resting here, I'm setting up camp and I get to send somebody out to go hunting. And their skill at hunting is going to help determine if we have enough food. There's somebody else who I assign to camouflage the camp. Somebody to cook a meal who they could, if they aren't a good cook, they could ruin the meal. And if I don't set a guard for the second shift here because I don't have anybody to do that, I could get ambushed during that time. And my party could be in big trouble just from a random encounter that happens in the middle of the wilderness because I didn't bother to set a rest. So that kind of stuff, I think, is an unusual choice, but one that it's going to be very appealing to a lot of people. The other thing that I think some people are going to be really attracted to here is the opportunity to experience the Pathfinder Kingmaker module for themselves as a computer role-playing game, and have some sort of narrative moments like what we're seeing here that carry the story forward in interesting ways just by the choices that you make during those things. So anyway, that's a look here at Pathfinder Kingmaker. We wanted to give you everybody kind of a glance of what to expect here because it's a little different from what a lot of the more recent computer role-playing games are doing.
Yeah, it all looks very complicated, Miller. If someone hasn't played, traditional tabletop role-playing games, are they going to be completely lost in something like this?
I don't think that somebody who hasn't played tabletop games is going to feel lost, but I do think that if you're looking for an entryway game into the CRPGs, this probably isn't it, if only because a lot of the goal here seems to be to harken back to a way of playing these kinds of games that largely went extinct more than a decade ago.
Right.
Instead of evolving away from that, they've stuck with some very old formulas that some people are going to be overjoyed to see because they felt that things like Pillars of Eternity moved too far away from that tradition. So I'll leave it up to you if you're one of those people or not. But this is Pathfinder Kingmaker. It is out now from Owlcat Games. You can get it for $40 on Steam. So check it out if it sounds like it's your kind of thing.
Cool.
All right, thanks for watching.